This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Hey there, Culture Gabfest listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI. And stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Twisters Blows Away the Box Office edition. It's Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. On today's show, Twisters is the belated sequel to the much-beloved Twister. This one stars Glen Powell and Daisy Edgar-Jones as storm-chasing rivals. It did huge, that's huge, with a Y, business this past weekend. And then the new documentary, Sorry Not Sorry, re-examines the comedian Louis C.K.'s Me Too disgraces by interviewing the journalists who first reported the story and the women whom he victimized. Finally, we explore the utter destigmatization, normalization, and universalization of gambling in American life, keying off of an Atlantic Monthly piece. But first, I'm joined by Julia Turner. Hey, Julia, welcome to the show.
Hello, hello.
You are a fellow at the Annenberg School of Journalism at USC. We're joined as well by Dana Stevens, the film critic for Slate. Dana, how are you doing?
Greetings. Nice to be here.
All right, let's make a show. It's been 28 long years. I mean, incredible by Hollywood standards to wait this long since the first Twister, a fun Hollywood romp about storm-chasing grad students. It's one of those movies that took on somehow a blessed afterlife. No one thinks it's a great movie, I don't think, but kind of everyone thinks of it fondly or remembers it fondly. That goodwill adds up to very bankable IP. Now comes a belated reboot, Twisters. It stars Glen Powell as Tyler Owens, a YouTube star who calls himself a quote-unquote tornado wrangler. He's a social media bullshitter with a twinkle in his eye and a little bit of a cowboy vibe. It also stars Daisy Edgar-Jones, the British actress best known for her starring role in Normal People, the TV show. She's Kate, a credentialed and serious and in many ways traumatized meteorologist who seeks to tame tornadoes using geoengineering. Bear saying up front, the director of the film is Lee Isaac Chung, who made a movie we talked about, Minari. There will be a lot to say about that later. In the meantime, in the clip, we hear Kate and Tyler bantering as each tries to outfox the other en route to chasing down a storm. Let's listen.
Tyler, do we know which storm we're going after yet?
Oh, why don't we ask?
Kate.
Hi, Kate. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Ben. I'm a reporter doing a piece on American storm chasing. Tyler's letting me ride along.
And Ben just had to promise to write nothing but good stuff about me.
Good luck with that.
Hang on. You didn't say which way we were going yet. Now, from what I gather, west, we double our chances. East, well, it's high risk, high reward.
Well, go for the reward. I don't want Ben to think you're boring.
Now, boring is not usually a problem for me, Kate.
Two cells to the west are fighting over the same inflow. They'll choke each other out. This one to the east is the sky all to herself. Moisture, wind shear, instability. All the things you need to give Ben a good show.
Oh dear, Dana, what did you make of this would-be blockbuster? It looks shaping up to be a big blockbuster.
I mean, first of all, let me say that sound clip gives the false impression that this movie mainly sounds like people standing around having quiet, rational conversations about weather. And a far more typical sound clip would have involved, huge swooshing tornado sounds and things, water towers crashing to the ground and people running and screaming. But I guess that at least did get across, the sort of basic screwball dynamic at the heart of the movie, which is not dissimilar to the screwball dynamic at the heart of Twister from 1996, but to me lacks its spark. But in the same sense, both of them are disaster movies with, this kind of romance at the center. Here, it's a typical oil and water romance, right? The serious scientist versus the hot dogging, showboating, social media weather guy. So, first of all, we should start this conversation by saying longtime listeners will know that Twister is one of my comfort movies. We actually, during the high days of the COVID pandemic, when there weren't movie theaters open or new movies to see, had a whole series where we each, would propose one of our comfort watches. And Twister was mine. I hope that you guys enjoyed that week that we all watched Twister together. I really did. I don't think that there are many blockbusters from that golden era of the 90s action blockbuster that have held up as well and have as much affection still from audiences as Twister. Another one that's a possible contender is Speed, the previous movie of the same director, Jan de Bont. Both of those movies, I would say, Speed and Twister, have this quality that no action movie could really have anymore, in that they're sort of small, self-sufficient, standalone. Their budgets may not have been small, but their ambitions were limited to just being a good movie that got you to go to the theater and see it. They weren't recycled IP. And now in the age of, 21st century blockbusters, it's pretty rare that a blockbuster comes along that isn't recycling something or other. So I guess my thoughts about the new Twisters is, first of all, great time in the theater, lots of fun to watch, well-filmed action. And Lee Isaac Chung, who, as Steve was saying, is primarily known for this very intimate first film he made, Minari, about his own childhood as a Korean immigrant in Arkansas, has really, I think, proven his chops at being able to manage a big action blockbuster in a way that moves along quickly and is fun to watch in the theater. Does it have the scruffy charm of the original 1996 Twister with all of its weird supporting cast and its sort of oddball nature? Not really. It does feel a little bit generic, and you can feel the recycled IP in it. But that said, I was very happy that it did this well at the box office, because it would be a good thing if blockbusters in the summer achieved this quality level more often.
Julia, what about you? I seem to recall you have inordinate affection for the original as well.
No, I hadn't seen it until Dana made us watch it. And then, of course, I loved it. Yeah.
Triumph.
I was a newbie to it, but of course, as with all things, Dana was correct, and it is terrific. I think I appreciated that this movie was aspiring to be that kind of movie and not positing a global conspiracy or aliens, or it was trying for that same kind of self-contained human set story with a little bit of goofy pseudoscience thrown in. I really enjoyed this. And I wish it had been a few ticks more delightful. Like it was a solidly constructed film. But it, honestly, for a movie that's about like wildly unpredictable weather patterns that could touch down anywhere and destroy or change anything, like the plot beats of this are so foreseeable. This is a Cat 5 hurricane, not a tornado, because you're like, it's coming in here. I think I know what's going to happen to those characters. I think I know where the relationship between these characters is going. Like it wasn't as sprightly or mischievous in its storytelling or devilish as the tornadoes that it is ostensibly about. But the performances, I think, are really great. And I'm curious, Steve, to know what you thought. I was surprised reading reviews after I saw the film that a number of people critiqued Daisy Edgar-Jones's performance. No, she's too British to play an American heartland girl, and she's too dreamy and da-da-da. I thought it was a great performance. I wonder if some of those reactions were coming from the fact that the film's major emotional arc is her trauma about the dangers of storm chasing in her past, and whether she can kind of face those fears and work up the courage to meet her destiny as a storm wrangling meteorologist in the future. And the film gives a lot of attention to that emotional journey, and I think she acts it well. So I wonder if some of the frustration or critique of her performance is less about that performance and more about the fact that maybe the movie would have been more fun if more of that emotional energy had been given to her, to the romantic relationship. I mean, it's almost the Bechdel test too far. Like, actually, sometimes it's fun to watch people fall in love. It doesn't have to be demoralizing or sexist. But what did you make of Daisy Edgar-Jones's performance? Because that was the note in the reviews I was most surprised by. I thought she was pretty solid.
Yeah, I have a little ritual when I walk out of my favorite Brooklyn movie theater and take the half-hour trot home, as I call a friend of mine on the West Coast with whom I've been discussing movies for God knows. I mean, is it 40 years now? I think probably. Anyway, and one of the first things I said is I love the performances. It's, Glen Powell being Glen Powell, and then this woman, I don't remember her name. I didn't remember seeing who the female lead was when I went in. I go in pretty naive to movies, and I said, I don't know. She's just very American, all American, kind of girl next door. I say this non-insultingly. I think this is the intended look and feel of her, and in the movie, and kind of gave off Meg Ryan vibes, which in keeping with the 90s thing of the whole movie. Went home, Googled it. I was like, Daisy Edgar-Jones, how do I know that name? I was floored, A, to discover she was British, and B, she was the woman that I massively cathected with from Normal People. I thought she did a great job. I actually thought she was limited by the script more in a way than Powell. Powell gets to be playful and latter-day Cary Grant, and she is forced to fit into this sort of slightly bizarre emotional, kaleidoscope that is her sort of story, which leads me to, I would say, my major comment about the film. I enjoyed it enormously without thinking it was very good. It definitely isn't. It's like that Zac Efron, Nicole Kidman movie, a pre-End Times throwback. It's a nostalgia and a comfort watch, but with this funny twist, right? So there are two things looming on the horizon of this movie, neither one of which is a tornado. The first is her, I think, completely overdone backstory. It gives her a trauma story that kind of works in a Pixar movie when they're anima, whatever, computer animals or something, but on a human level, for us to kind of absorb what we get in the first 5 minutes of the movie in order to give it freight, I thought was a big and slightly weird ask. It had the odd reverse effect of making it seem sort of glib, like would anybody ever recover from that experience? And then the second, of course, which people have brought up as much, I think, as the Daisy Edgar-Jones performance, is climate change. And I'm very interested to hear from you two, because I have some real feelings about how the movie handled it, which is, some people argue not at all. I don't quite agree with that, but I'm going to throw it back to you, Dana. The climate change charge, which is very intelligently made by Sam Adams and Slade, among others, mentioned by a lot of other critics. What did you make of the movie's either take on it or evasion of it?
I think the question ultimately has to be, do you believe that a summer blockbuster revival of the 1996 movie about disasters, basically a disaster movie with a romance in the center, is the place to talk about climate change? And I'm not sure that kind of social message would have added a lot sort of slapped on top of this movie. I mean, this is clearly a movie about, the devastation that twisters cause, more so than the 96 movie, I would say. That might not be as much of a comfort watch for me if it dealt as much with, the devastation that tornadoes leave behind as this movie does. It's a more somber movie in general, whether or not that somberness is explicitly linked to climate change. So I guess that I would say that there are worse things than going to see a disaster movie about scary climate futures that doesn't necessarily have a big dystopian sort of heavy framing of like, this is us, this is our future, we are doomed. And that there are worse things than having that experience, coming out of the movie theater with it, and getting your climate policy information elsewhere.
I also, the movie is doing really interesting things with its setting. And obviously part of what makes Isaac Lee Chung as the director here so interesting, grew up in Arkansas. Minari was a sort of portrait of immigrant life in Arkansas. He knows this landscape intimately. They filmed in Oklahoma during storm season, which was something he wanted to capture the authenticity of it. I mean, did you guys count the American flags in this film? Like, nobody's ever not wearing an American flag. Basically.
I didn't. I missed it.
Including one very implausible shirt that our main character digs up when she goes home to see her mom. A wonderful
I know the
character.
Shirt you mean.
That shirt is like an expensive Italian shirt. Like, it just that is not a Walmart shirt. I should say, like, the portrait of the Midwest here, I think, is interesting, and I won't pretend to be an expert on it, but I love when she goes home and sees her mom, played by Maura Tierney. There's a moment that struck me as so precise and well observed, where she tries to kind of apologize to her mom for having been absent in the wake of her traumas. And her mom gets a call, and I was like, okay, I got to get like, shit. The mom doesn't indulge the mushiness in a way that just struck me as a precise emotional beat of the kind that I wish there were more of for more of the small characters. And it made me feel like it was a choice to portray the lived experience of these increasing storms for this portion of America that is probably not looking at them through the lens of climate change, and maybe looking at them through the lens of just having your night at the rodeo where someone rides around on a horse in a Star-Spangled Wonder Woman outfit, carrying a American flag larger than the horse with a flaming sparkler shooting out the top of the flag. Like, I think there was a little bit of a sense of like, well, what is this? How does this feel on the ground to people? It's not necessarily processed through the lens of a diatribe about climate change. It's just processed as fear and panic and chaos, and scientists and business people are the people who are going to be looking at what can be done and have different motives and different options. And I don't know, it didn't bother me. I certainly do not think what this film needed to make it better was a lot more talk about climate change. And as you noted in your review, like, extreme weather is related to climate change. The particulars of tornadoes and climate change. It sounds like there's enough uncertain about the exact dynamics of that relationship that to pack it in here would only spur rebuttals that are not necessary.
Right. One thing I want to say I did really notice, though, is that there's a little winky towards the end of the movie, without giving anything away, where a theater proscenium, a movie theater proscenium, blows out in exactly the shape of the screen. And I really felt like Chung was saying, it's coming for you too. You people sitting in this movie and treating this as a summer entertainment. That was things don't, as you know, as we all know, but we sometimes have to remind ourselves, everything that happens on screen is the result of a choice. That was a very definite choice by a director who's made small indie movies and knows something about mise en scène.
Yeah, that moment, Steve, is also a shout out to a moment in the original Twister. There's a drive-in scene. There's a scene where The Shining is showing at a drive-in, and a tornado rips through. But you're right that the way that Chung frames the indoor theater screen being blown away more explicitly suggests like tornado is replacing movie. Instead of looking at Frankenstein, which is what they were watching, the James Whale Frankenstein from the 30s, they're suddenly staring at the actual funnel cloud. So I do think that they're, in addition to an affectionate shout out, I mean, almost beat for beat, Lee Isaac Chung is recreating stuff from the original Twister, but he's a smart enough director that he's doing it in a way that is getting across maybe different messages sometimes, and that's one of those moments.
No, I agree. Glen Powell is as great as everyone says he is. The only thing I will say is, the romance is a little underdeveloped, and even more underdeveloped is Anthony Ramos's kind of feelings of entanglement or crush on the Kate character. And he's such a charismatic smolder, her total lack of registration of him as a potentially attractive person is a bummer. It's a bummer that she treats him like R2-D2, and then Glen Powell walks onto the screen, and she's like, woo, 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 woo. It's like, well, excuse me, there's like another pretty fine specimen of masculinity right there.
He's the Ducky. I feel like he's the John Cryer Ducky.
I know, but he doesn't look like Ducky, guys. Like, hello.
All right, the movie's Twisters, and it's in theaters, and it hardly needed a plug from us, but 3 thumbs up.
A tornado's destructive power is appalling. Strong buildings are reduced to rubble. Automobiles lifted and flung through the air.
It's summer and we're all traveling a lot, and packing for a trip can be really stressful. Either the clothes you have don't fit, they're worn out, they don't match, they just don't feel right for the place you're traveling to. Well, that is where Quince comes in. Quince has high-quality vacation essentials that you'll be packing for many trips to come. I know personally that I am very soon going on a trip to England with my daughter. I'm very excited about this. It's going to be really hot while we're there. It's in August. I'm taking at least one Quince item, which is the black silk tiered dress that I've talked about before. It rolls up into a tiny little bundle because it's silk and doesn't take up much room. Then it rolls out and is perfectly unwrinkled and ready to wear. Steve, I know you're a Quince fan too. If you were going on vacation, what would you take with you from Quince?
Oh man, I mean, the linen shirt collection I have from Quince is going to a hot destination is non-negotiable. As a quick aside, I ordered a wrong kind of linen shirt by mistake. Beautiful green, dark green shirt. It was perfect for my daughter, who I deeded it to. I really love their stuff. Beautifully made.
There you have it. Steve and I are genuine Quince fans. You too can pack your bags with high quality essentials from Quince. Go to quince.com/culture for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture.
This episode is brought to you by ZBiotics. There's now a game-changing product to use before a night out with drinks. It's called ZBiotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. You have to make a choice. You can either have a great night or a great next day. ZBiotics is a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/culture to get 15% off your first order when you use culture at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/culture and use the code CULTURE at checkout for 15% off.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast we discuss business. Julia, what do we have?
We've got some news for our listeners. Our Slate Plus bonus segments are no longer just tacked on to the end of our normal episodes. We are turning those segments into their own standalone mini bonus episodes, which will be easily available in your feed if you are a Slate Plus member. We think this will allow potential listeners to more easily discover our subscriber content, and that helps us keep the studio lights on. For this week's segment, we're going to discuss a New York Times interactive data visualization, What's in Your Grocery Cart? It's a deep dive into how Americans shop for food, and we will follow up with our own grocery cart confessions, the most embarrassing, ridiculous things that we purchase and what it says about us. Steve professes to be embarrassed by almonds. Prepare to be amazed by the things that we buy and consume. If you are not a Slate Plus member, you can sign up today at slate.com/culture plus. Members get ad-free podcasts and lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment I just mentioned. You'll also get to hear members-only programming on other Slate shows like Slow Burn and the Political Gabfest. And members get unlimited access to all the great writing on slate.com. You'll never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member. You'll also be supporting our work and the work of all of our brilliant colleagues. These memberships are really important for Slate. So please sign up today at slate.com/culture plus. Again, that's slate.com/culture plus. Or subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page.
Stand-up comedy is dominantly, I think to this day, dominantly a boys' club. It certainly was 20, 25 years ago. And Louis C.K., at the height of his fame, was the head boy. He was unrivaled in acclaim, power, and influence. And in an amorphous workplace, not filled with overtly legible lines of authority, he badly abused the power of his celebrity by sexually victimizing women comedians. Now comes Sorry Not Sorry, a documentary whose main focus is on the women whose sense of self and professional identity he violated, if not out and out destroyed, as well as CK's completely unapologetic return to stand-up. The movie is directed by Carolyn Suh and Cara Mones. In the clip, we hear comedian Jen Kirkman recalling being propositioned by CK in a corner of a bar. It would be the first of several uncomfortable encounters with the comedian. Let's listen.
He basically said something along the lines of like, what? Like, I like to jerk off in front of people. And I was like, you mean you would have done it like here? Like in public? And a friend of mine came over at that moment and Louis took out a picture, again, pre-phone cameras, and just was like, I was just showing Jen a picture of my daughter. And that's when I was just like, ew, ew, ew. Because he wasn't. So that was it. And again, I wasn't like in a shower after crying like a Lifetime movie. I was just like, what the fuck was that? I knew from then on I didn't like him. I didn't want to be around him. But it's just tough because you see like everyone you like and know hanging out with the dude. And then it like didn't dawn on me at the time to ask my guy friends, like, why are you friends with him? And I started to adopt the attitude of like, for a while, I was like, yeah, it's totally cool that he does it. Because then I started hearing more stories. Oh, he does this to everyone. I'm like, he is such a weirdo. Like, I just was like, I guess it's cool to act like that. I mean, I was too old to think that way, but I did.
All right, Julia, let me start with you. I mean, there's sort of a lot of ways to approach this documentary. It's a story about what happened initially, about the open secret of it and the unwritten code of silence around it for a long time, the breaking of the story by journalists, and the really horrible, sort of tragic coda, which is his rehabilitation in air quotes. Anyway, what did you make of this documentary?
I was interested to watch it because the mystery of the canceled men's self-uncancellations, it keeps unfurling, right? Like the moment of Me Too, the moment of this is unacceptable, the moment of let's all speak up has receded. And, you know, the choice that victims make to speak to journalists, to tell their stories, to bring these things to light is something that I think potential sources reflect on and the journalists reflect on as they think about what it means to tell these stories and to go public with a story like this. The documentary really focuses both on some women who had difficult encounters with Louis C.K., but it does not include 4 of, I think, the 5 sources in the New York Times story from 2017. 4 of them chose not to speak to the documentarians, probably feeling like, well, I already told my story and dealt with whatever the consequences were, and I don't need to open that up again and have that be take up even more space in my life. I mean, we don't hear that, but that I assume is what their decisions were. Jen Kirkman, whose voice we heard there, was not in the 2017 story. Her encounter with Louis C.K. she had alluded to and had been rumored about, and she had sort of already been dealing with public pressure about it prior to that reporting. And so she chose not to participate. And she's a very, very powerful voice in the documentary here. But I thought this documentary was really interesting for what it reveals about the costs of coming forward and the satisfactions of coming forward. And then I also thought it was interesting when it touched on how Louis C.K. has and has not processed what he was doing to women and kind of the laziness of his post-scandal comedy and sort of the hopes that his fans had that he might actually be someone who could really come to understand what he had done and why, and how he seems to have just given up on that. It may sound perverse to say so. I kind of wanted a little bit more of that second story. It was very powerful to hear from these women and to hear from the reporters kind of reflecting on their work. But the particular way in which Louis C.K.'s apology, which contained within it what seemed like a pretty sincere understanding of what he had done wrong and a desire to think about it in a tone, has curdled into this kind of self-satisfied, smug yuckville. I didn't want to spend more time in his yucky brain, but I found myself curious about that, and the movie kind of skated along the surface of that. And I understand that choice because you probably don't want to go back to the bad man, and you know, both tracks of reporting were interesting, and maybe the story of why his, you know, potential for true self-inquiry curdled into self-satisfied absolution is a boring story, but I felt like I was a little bit interested in more of that. I mean, just that you get a round table of him going around on various bros YouTube podcasts, you know, accepting their congratulations for having gotten these women's consent before he jerked off in front of them. Heavy implied air quotes around every word in that sentence, obviously. What did you guys think?
Well, I'll say that I went into watching this with great trepidation because of my own just deep sense of personal betrayal by Louis C.K. Because I was probably of the three of us the biggest fan of his before. I think I experienced the biggest kind of reality break, not just realizing that he had done, these pervy things and intruded on these women's privacy, but because of the way he handled it afterwards. I think, Julia, like you, if his rehabilitation tour, which began only 9 months after his supposed cancellation and hasn't really seemed to include any real self-reflection or, apology beyond the initial, the written apology that did seem like it was going to lead to a period of sincere reflection that he initially issued. I feel like I precisely don't want to see what he's doing now to redeem his reputation, even if that's the, ugly thing that we should be looking at to understand this. So I have to say that I found this documentary, as somebody who followed the whole thing really closely at the time and, wrote about my sense of betrayal the week of his downfall, the week that his movie, I Love You, Daddy, was about to come out and was then canceled because of all this. I didn't feel like there was a lot of new insight here. I mean, and that is essentially because of access problems. It was a sort of right around because the filmmakers were not able to get, completely understandably, were not able to get the two women who, accused him of masturbating in front of them in 2002, I think it was, on camera, or, they didn't contribute to the documentary at all. Neither, obviously, did Louis C.K. himself. Neither did, for example, Pamela Adlon, right, who worked with him very closely and who's mentioned in this as somebody whose career he helped, but she wouldn't actually sit down and talk either. So I feel like the people they did get to talk, while some of them have very interesting things to say, are generally somewhat peripheral to this story. The closest they could get, to speaking to actual victims of Louis C.K. were Jen Kirkman, who we just heard from in that clip, and Abby Schachner, a comedian who has a story about Louis that he was masturbating during a phone call with her, I believe. So it was, a more indirect story, but she was someone who experienced, some victimization at his hands. Without the voices, though, of people who were right there in the stories that brought him down and who were working with him, making his show Louis and his movie I Love You, Daddy while this was happening, without hearing a little bit more kind of real time, this is how the fall happened, I kind of felt like it was all talking head analysis. And some of the talking heads, again, are great. Jodie Cantor, really, really obviously important voice on Me Too, and somebody who's interesting to hear from. Our own beloved Wesley Morris, who's been on our show many times, has some really smart things to say. But they're cultural commentators talking about the fact of Me Too and its effect on comedy, rather than people who are really taking apart this story. So if you're somebody who followed it closely already, it kind of feels like a right around to me.
I have to respectfully disagree. I thought that the three principal women who were interviewed were, against their will, brought into a very powerful narrative, right? When it was an open secret, it kept getting teased by blind items in the press on Gawker. Vice ran something, Jen Kirkman's podcast, which didn't name Louis C.K. There was this kind of the force of Louis C.K. became a dominant narrative in each of three women's lives featured in this documentary. The third woman is Megan Kessler, who did not have a direct encounter with Louis C.K., nonetheless dared to go to one of the big comedy festivals and ask people on the carpet, I think, about the open secret, at which point she was absolutely screamed at, and it feels like perhaps has been since blackballed from the comedy world. I thought that was adequate enough, in part because these women are so fucking smart and articulate and charismatic, and to think that all of their lives got recentered on this guy and his dick is horrific, right? I mean, that's as close as you're gonna get, but I think it's close enough. And Kirkman emerges to me as a total star. I mean, she's obviously a brilliant comedian, and she's super articulate and very precise and carves the episode at the joints, as they say, right? Like, she really is very precise about what happened and what it meant and what it didn't mean, but nonetheless, it's ridiculous the way it hijacked her own story as a comedian, person with 2 Netflix specials, cannot get an interview at the major media outlet without having to answer a question about Louis C.K. And once she refuses to do that, they don't cover her show. So I thought it was enough. The second thing, so there was that. I thought sort of the next thing that was revelatory to me was, I have to say, and this is open to interpretation, I thought Jon Stewart came off terribly here. There's no way, I am willing to assert my opinion here. I can't prove it. I believe there was no way he didn't know or hadn't heard these rumors, the idea that they hadn't reached his ears. He's caught on camera being asked at a college event by an intrepid student what he thinks of it and whether it influences his behavior at all. Stewart has a deer in the headlight looks that he can't shake out of his eyes. And he answers in the bullshit, most evasive, in his own way, passive aggressive way. Made me hate the guy for the first time, genuinely hate him. I think afterwards he gave bullshit, evasive stories about trying to recoup his reputation, saying, if I had known this fake soul searching with Howard Stern, if I had known, what would I have done? Chappelle is awful, the worst way, belittling these women. I'll never interact with his comedy again. And then there's Louis C.K. himself, right, who issued a pitch perfect statement that was clearly authored by him the day after the Times piece came out. It really wasn't, there was nothing pro forma or automated about it. And it just, I knew that he had gone the route that he had, but only in the vaguest way because I was done with him forever. But just to see up close, to see, as Julia, as you say, there's a psychology at work here, right? To go from apparently soul searching to smug, angry, and as if you're the fucking victim, to recenter the narrative back on your own fucking dick is just so grotesque in some way. And I don't know. I thought the documentary was, it had to work within its own limitations. And I found it very powerful. Doesn't it raise again for the millionth time, and I throw this to the panel, the question of, Dana, would you ever watch a old rerun of Louis now? Or
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one for me. And I will have to say that maybe because of my generation or something, in general, I don't have the problem that a slightly younger generation seems to have with the separate the art from the artist thing. Like, I'll see a Roman Polanski movie in a minute because I think he's a great and important director, even if not all his movies have been great. There's plenty of artists who I may revile their personal lives, but still am interested in their art because of the kind of work he did and my own kind of intimate relationship with it, which, again, like, I've written about it already. I'm not going to go write about it again, but like, I really loved Louis C.K.'s show, and I believed that it was groundbreaking because it was honest, and that whole way that it kind of, and he presented themselves as this new kind of comedy that was exploring male abjection and doing this kind of honest deep dive into the dark parts of his head. And of course it turns out there's way darker parts that he was not plumbing, right? Because of that relationship that he made with the viewer, that compact, which I completely bought in on, I think it would be hard for me to go back and watch a Louis now. And that's really sad because those shows meant a lot to me at the time.
Well, the other thing that's striking, and why I kind of wish the show had spent a little more time on Louis' evolution and Louis' lack of reckoning. And the show does great things with clips. Like, it's true, Dana, that there's a lot of people they don't get to sit down, but that portrait of Jon Stewart is absolutely devastating and lacerating, as you say. They have him dead to rights. I think your interpretation is 100% correct, Steve. And that's just the doc equivalent of a write around. I mean, that's just really, really smart clip work. And I almost wish there'd been a little bit more of some of that, because what I suspect is at play in Louis' failure to evolve is that Louis was thinking of Dana as his audience, not you specifically, but like, Louis' show was for the Danas of the world, and Louis' apology was for the Danas of the world. And then Louis realized he was never going to get the Danas back, or he gave up on giving the Danas back, or he gave up on doing the actual kind of introspection and grappling with the shitty things about himself that would have allowed him to keep operating in that, like, authentic soul searching mode. And he just started cultivating a new audience of the kind of like lazy, anti-woke, just asking
Rogan.
questions, Rogan bros. And he doesn't need Dana anymore. So he doesn't have to do that.
It's such a shame, that you put it that way about like lost the Danas of the world. Like he could have gotten me back personally. Honestly, if the tone of that note that you mentioned, Steve, which was really, truly appropriately apologetic, had been followed by like, Guy actually disappears, right? For a significant period of time. Guy, I don't know, like does important fundraising work for me too, in other ways, sort of like does some of the work, right? Puts some footwork in, helps other people's careers, women's careers take off, right? Maybe, I don't know, start some kind of a fundraising network to get young women's careers off the ground. I don't know. I'm not his publicist, but if he had spent a couple years doing some hard work and introspection and then come back with good comedy that was not about like, look at me, I'm the victim now. It would not also have to be all the time about like, I was so horrible, right? But he could have reinvented himself as a comedian in a way that I would have once again gone to his live stand-up shows as I have done in the past and watched his television. He could have made other choices.
Right. And the fact that he didn't means that you never mattered to him. He just wanted an audience, and getting the views back was too hard. So he just went for the Shane Gillis fans and the Joe Rogan listeners, who are legion. And there may be more of them in the world than there are Danas, which is not a great thing for the world. And so it sort of makes the whole original thing feel like a sham.
All right, it's Sorry Not Sorry. The documentary can be found for about $5 a pop right now on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, where I watched it. Variety of places. Google it. You can find it. I think it's worth watching. Let's move on.
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. Summertime is supposed to be an opportunity to slow down, but sometimes you can't help but notice that actually time is moving fast. Your kids are starting a new grade soon, maybe even a new school, maybe even in my kids' case, college. And all that while, they are learning and building independence. To help your kids stay connected as they start spending more time out of the house, you should try Greenlight. Greenlight is a debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, parents can keep an eye on their kids' spending and money habits while kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely. Somewhere in the midst of her high school career, my daughter and I started using Greenlight. It is essentially just a card that you give your kid that the parent can then load from their own bank account. So it's sort of an ambulatory allowance, but it allows for a lot of things that wouldn't be allowed for by simply, giving your kid a credit card. For one thing, you can carefully track and watch how much they're spending. You can also have them make their own plans to put money aside to save. If they have other friends who have Greenlight, and some of my daughter's friends do, they can send money to each other, sort of Venmo style. So it's a good way to sort of learn to manage money when you're just starting to achieve that independence from your parents. Greenlight is an easy, convenient way for parents to raise financially smart kids and for families to navigate life together. Sign up for Greenlight today and get your first month free when you go to greenlight.com/culture. That's greenlight.com/culture to try Greenlight for free. Greenlight.com/culture.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Here's our expert, the technology futurist, Ian Kahn.
Hi, I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, as our company expands, so do our hiring efforts. How can AI help us attract top talent? Signed, Searching for Higher Power.
So, Searching for Higher Power, one of the most daunting undertakings of an HR leader today is building a new team and finding and vetting new talent. This is a very time-consuming process and can take precious organizational resources. As a companion to the HR team, AI technology can be used to create job descriptions, analyze candidate resumes, and filter candidates into various pools based on experience, skills, or any other parameter. You can also use AI to match internal talent with positions available. Parameters for this can be set, rules can be set, that can all be done through the algorithm. There are so many things that we as humans could be not looking at that AI can do in a matter of seconds.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
Suddenly, gambling seems to be everywhere. So writes Christina Emba in the July 8th issue of The Atlantic Monthly. In her piece, Gambling Enters the Family Zone, she goes on to say, this sort of vice creep, a societal normalization of what used to be seen as unsavory habits, gambling, smoking, marijuana, watching porn, is accelerated by people's addiction to devices. In this case, giving casual bettors the tools to become compulsive wagerers, on and on. I mean, a phenomenon I'm sure all of our listeners have noticed. If you watch any kind of sports, virtually any kind of sports, certainly football, baseball, basketball, there are what are called prop bets, these little bets on every micro aspect of it. They're advertised on the sporting events themselves. What used to be a Chinese wall between sporting and gambling has collapsed completely. Casinos are popping up in places where there never were any before. Obviously, the state lotteries are ubiquitous. It is becoming a completely destigmatized activity. And it raises this interesting question. This article raises the very interesting question of why there was a stigma attached to it in the first place, and should there still be one, and what it means that whatever stigma there once was is now being completely eradicated. Julia, let me start with you. What do you make of this phenomenon?
I'm so interested to discuss this with you guys because I have been taken by surprise. I mean, obviously, I've been following the news and you know the kind of steady advance of betting opportunities into our lives, into our phones, you know, references to betting on sports broadcasts, et cetera. But the place where it's most surprised me has been in my own home, where a regular subject of dispute between me and my 11-year-old sons is like, why I'm such a mean mom because I won't let them sports gamble. And I'm just are you out of your minds? They have some running something with their cousins about, you know, European soccer, and can't we let them? They want to. I mean, I don't even understand. I am not a gambler. I've been to casinos twice. I just don't even know enough to know what I'm telling them they can't do. But they somehow want to pit themselves against each other in their evaluation of the skills of various European soccer stars on some betting market, blah, blah, blah. And it's the source of much back and forth of, oh, they're going to bet this or they're going to bet that. Like the hypothetical betting in their minds that's happening is elaborate and extensively discussed. And then the only obstacle in their way is their parents who are like, what the hell? Absolutely not. You definitely cannot. It just strikes me as crazy. I mean, I don't know people who've personally been crippled by gambling addiction, but it is one of the most devastating addictions. It's life ruining. And it seems like letting your children sports gamble would be like being like, sure, try heroin. What? I don't understand. And you know, the thing that's happening at Dave & Buster's, which is sort of building into Dave & Buster's and building into Dave & Buster's economic models, the idea that maybe sometimes when you go out to Dave & Buster's with your friends, you are placing little bets with each other on who can beat who at skee ball or whatever. And the notion that should be kind of integrated into the Dave & Buster's experience, and chips and blips and beeps and whatever, and that Dave & Buster's should get a cut of all of that spending. Certainly, I understand why it makes sense from Dave & Buster's perspective, but I don't know. I guess what I'm curious about is how gambling has come into your guys' lives during this recent creep, and kind of what you make of it, like the bigger why of it. I feel like I understand the mechanics of why it has advanced, the technology and the legal changes that have caused it to advance. But I don't feel like I understand the bigger why of why our society should decide at the same moment that we've made such advances against smoking, for example, in public places, like this one, let's bring this one in. Let's invite this one into the house. What is going on here?
I mean, maybe Steve, as a sports fan, can speak to this better than I can from reading about, you know, this recent uptick in gambling, and, you know, which is sort of pegged to the fact, as you say, Julia, that Dave & Buster's, you know, the hamburger arcade fun emporium is also becoming now a kind of online casino where you can get an app that helps you bet while you're at Dave & Buster's. So I guess maybe my answer to why now has to do with the similarity between that kind of gamification and social media, which has been, I think, adequately studied, right? That the kind of dopamine rushes that you get from social media refreshing, et cetera, are analogous to what you feel when you win at a gambling game. It's the concept of variable reward, the whole thing of rats pushing levers and sometimes getting a reward and sometimes not. That psychology has been studied to death and has obviously helped in the design of lots of social media apps and other kinds of gamified devices. And as somebody who's not a gamer in any sense, like not an online gamer, not a board game player, not interested in going to Dave and Buster's to either bet or not bet on the games there, maybe I'd play skee ball once or twice with my daughter with no bets placed, and then I would leave Dave and Buster's. So I really don't get the psychology of it as far as the user end, but I totally get the psychology and the financial wisdom from the production end of these gamifying devices and, sort of gamifying all social interaction. I see why there are greedy business owners and would-be entrepreneurs who want to play upon that now very well-studied kind of human weakness, but it doesn't make it less contemptible.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I used to watch a lot of sports. Now I watch intermittently. And what's funny is after a hiatus, when I cable cut, I really didn't have access to it, and now I do. Coming back to it, the shocking thing is the prevalence of advertising devoted to gambling and gambling sites and the interpenetration of the games themselves with information clearly meant to feed the raw material of these tiny little micro bets that people can place. You need those stats to be officially presented in order for a bet to pay out. Do you think the guy's going to get more or less than 3 yards on his next carry? I found it baleful, but like everything, I have both a Puritan, an angry Puritan inside me and a dispassionate Kantian, and the two are always fighting it out because I often have an initial response to something. I'm like, that's repulsive, and I want to moralize it into non-existence. And then this other part of me that asks, well, why? Like, well, why? Why particularly is gambling? So, Julia, you offered one answer, which is it's addictive, right? Well, but a lot of addictive things are legal, and they're in a sense semi-ubiquitous. Even cigarettes are purchasable virtually anywhere. Can't smoke them anywhere. But alcohol, I mean, they're baleful social things that we allow, and effects to totally ban them have backfired, and we won't do it again. So gambling, okay, well, it's not unique for being addictive. Let's just put it that way. Well, what I find really interesting about it is I don't think it's entirely puritanical to point out that among the things that the Puritans actually hated about gambling was what they hated about speculation, right? Making money off of money, which is that it delinks fortune making from any socially productive benefit. And it randomizes who wins and who loses to an extent that also delinks merit and reward. Now, in and of itself, doing it on a micro level in a leisure time activity, not that big a deal. The problem is it analogizes so beautifully to the direction the culture has taken as it financialized, as in fact speculators are making some of the largest fortunes on earth doing totally socially unproductive labor. And I don't think that you have to be a prude, a social prude or a cultural prude to point out that this is the general direction of the culture in some sense, that finance became the dominant fortune-making activity of the era, much of it speculative, and arguably almost all of it totally socially unproductive. A lot of very serious economists have argued that it essentially is just a tax on all of us in order to allow a select group of people to become, ridiculously rich. And I think in general, in America, I sense a world in which even the barest respect for anything like a meritocracy is just badly, badly eroded. And even if it were the smug meritocrats like you and me who, helped erode that link or that respect for the idea that you do something meaningful and socially productive in exchange for a salary or compensation or for public esteem, the total delinking of it is going to call bullshit on all of us, because I don't think a society constructed as ours can stay a healthy one once all economic activity is better analogized to gambling than it is to being a doctor or even a lawyer.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a really interesting theory. And I think the sense that the meritocracy is sucked is maybe part of it. Like if there's no actual way to make money through, the quote unquote correct Puritan path of working hard at a valuable endeavor and improving your skills and then getting paid successively more for it in a manner that allows you to afford a home and groceries. Like, why not? Why not make weird bets? That is not a path to economic fortune, but it makes sense that those opportunities, again, heavy air quotes implied, would be more appealing to people at this moment. And I hear you that there's a lot of, not necessarily beneficial stuff that is legal. And I don't know that I am as hardline against the increasing legalization of gambling for adults. It's just the cultural normalization once it reaches children. I guess that's what happens with all vices, right? I mean, it's similar with porn, which is mentioned in the Atlantic piece. The more it's normalized and the more it's available digitally, the more you have to think about it with regard to. And that's part of what vice laws are about, and part of what you maybe don't understand as a young adult and think differently about as a parent, or at least in my experience, that's been the case.
All right. Well, the piece that we were taking off from is well worth seeking out. It's very good. It's called Gambling Enters the Family Zone by Christine Emba for the Atlantic, July 8th issue. Check it out.
How can he close me up? On what ground? I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
You're winning, sir.
Oh, thank you very much.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse I get to say your name funny again. I'm so excited. What do you have?
I'm going to endorse something coming off of our last segment, our discussion of gambling just now. I was talking about, and Julia was a bit too, I think, just not really understanding the psychological component of gambling from the inside. I mean, which is, I guess, the essence of any addiction, but in that gambling is not a substance that I'm familiar with, right? Like, I may not be an alcoholic, but I know what it is to drink alcohol. As a complete non-gambler, I really don't get the appeal. But there is a movie from 2003 that I think is the closest I've come to understanding the psychology of gambling. And it's a wonderful, wonderful performance by Philip Seymour Hoffman. Have either of you seen Owning Mahoney, the movie about the bank embezzler / gambler?
No.
So it was this small movie. I remember back when it came out. I mean, he was a pretty big star at the time, and it was under the radar sort of movie at the time. It's based on a true story about a Canadian bank employee who essentially started skimming money. He was a very well trusted manager of a bank in Toronto, and he started embezzling money so that he could go gamble it away. And had this sort of cooking the books, this fancy strategy going on where he could just cook the books just long enough to go gamble and then bring some of the money back. And he got away with it for a very long time. This movie is, I think, loosely based on his story. The name is changed, but I think most of the details are pretty accurate. And wow, does Philip Seymour Hoffman get to the bottom of this very hard to understand and hard to read man who does almost nothing in the movie that's admirable, but who maintains, your sympathy and your compassion the entire time. It's a really, really good movie all around. Minnie Driver plays his girlfriend. She's excellent. John Hurt, who is never not wonderful, is in the movie as well. And it's directed by this director named Richard Kwiatkowski, who hasn't made a lot of films over the years, but another movie he made a few years before that, Love and Death on Long Island, is another big favorite of mine. So seek out Owning Mahoney. It is really one of the best portraits, I think, from the inside of gambling addiction I've ever seen. It's a pretty depressing hard watch, but it's also a stunning performance.
That's great. Julia, what do you have?
Okay, my endorsement this week is actually a question for our listeners, pegged ever so lightly to Twisters in our slightly weather-themed episode. I would like to hear from listeners their favorite children's picture books featuring the weather. There's obviously The Snowy Day, which is the incredible classic about snow in a city. My daughter really loves a book called Tap the Magic Tree, where you sort of tap the tree on each page and it goes through a succession of its pink spring flowers and its big green bloom and nesting birds and falling leaves. I feel like the cycle of the seasons is a frequent subject of kids' picture books, but I'm trying to collect like an array of the best ones that sort of depict it or have a thematic focus for a project I'm working on. So please email us at culturefest@slate.com and tell me your favorite kids' picture books that feature the seasons and the weather. And I will say that Tap the Magic Tree is a pretty fun book for like an under 5 kid because it gives the illusion. It's basically pretending to be an iPad app. You like tap each page and then you get a new picture on the next page. So it's like a fake swipe, which maybe makes it sound cynical and terrible, but it's a lovely little book and it's pretty fun. And my daughter loves it. So Tap the Magic Tree is my endorsement. And my call for entries is your favorite books featuring weather and seasons in the kind of the picture book category. Culturefest@slate.com. Thank you so much.
All right, I just want to pick up on an endorsement I made a couple of weeks ago. It's not my endorsement this week, but just to emphasize Robert Graves' novel, I, Claudius, from which I think probably at this point more famous BBC adaptation comes, is just an astonishing book, and it's incredible to read in 2024, given that it's about the death of the Roman Republic and what happens when power goes unchecked. And a certain kind of male ego goes completely unchecked. It is as lurid and page-turning as it possibly could be. It's incredibly funny. It's just a gripping book. It's almost 100 years old. It's incredible to think, but it was written, I think, in the early 30s. But anyway, having now finished it, I just want to emphasize that is a book to really seek out and read. I regard it as a page turner. It's not homework. But my endorsement this week is I went to the Brooklyn Museum to see something that is only up until August 4th, and as of now only in Brooklyn. It may tour, I don't know. But the point really is that you can see a lot of this work online, and you can there are some extraordinary books that really capture much of what's in the exhibit. In the mid-19th century, a Japanese artist named Utawaga Hiroshoge, apologies if I mispronounced it, made a series of woodcuts called 100 Famous Views of Edo, which is, I'm probably mispronouncing all of this, I'm sorry, which is the original name of Tokyo. And they are so unbelievably captivating. And the exhibit does a very good job of showing you how he moved forward the art form of woodcuts and certain kinds of semi-pastoral, semi-urban views of landscapes. But the color, the delicacy of the line, the uniqueness of the perspective, which was pretty novel in Hiroshige's work, are extraordinary. And you can buy very, very good books that have all 100 of these reproduced in them. And it's, especially if you're a fan of Miyazaki's, you definitely see the deep origins of his sensibility visually and otherwise in the work. They're extraordinary. And if you happen to be in New York City prior to August 4th, go to Brooklyn, go to the Brooklyn Museum and try to catch Hiroshige's 100 Famous Views of Edo. It is really worth it. But if not, check it out in the various iterations online. And to see them one after the other, I mean, spend some time online if you can only do it online, going through as many of the 100 as you can. The sheer variety of them, the ability to convey the life of a city at a certain moment when it's exploding commercially. And read also about the process that he used, that each image and color is a different woodcut. The way he worked with artisans to build these things is highly complex and interesting. Anyway, we will link to it, Hiroshige's 100 Famous Views of Edo. Guys, thank you so much. Julia, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you, Steve.
You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. Our producer is Jared Downing. For Dana Stevens and Julia Turner, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
Be warned that once you pick up a refreshingly cold drink from McDonald's and people see just how refreshingly cold that drink from McDonald's is, you may create drink envy. Because there are drinks, then there are drinks from McDonald's.
For a morning brew that really creates a stir, get any size iced coffee, including caramel and French vanilla, for just 99 cents before 11 a.m. Price and participation may vary, cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.